Buckle up because you're about to hear a controversial statement. I don't think we need any more engineers in the world. That's not to say that engineers aren't really important to how we create our societies and that engineers don't provide a valuable resource in our world. It's only to say that we need to improve the ways in which we educate our engineers. And let me tell you an example. So when I work with an engineer, we always start by defining the problem. And what we end up doing is starting from a fairly broad basis. So let's just take an example of world hunger. Now, I'm not an expert in hunger. I don't know much about the field. But whenever I work with an engineer and we're tackling a topic like hunger, the first thing they'll do is start looking at the variables. And so they'll say something like, well, this is how much food the world needs, this is how much food we produce, and we just need to make sure that there's a surplus. So they'll start down the track of wanting to create farming methods that enable people to produce more food. Or they'll look at the nutritional aspects and they'll try to find ways of making food that is more healthy. Now, I'm exaggerating here to make a point. I've never actually had a conversation with an engineer that went like this. But often what I find whenever I work with engineers is they want to tackle the problem mathematically. And so they look at the inputs and the outputs of the problem, they try to define the variables and then solve for all of those variables. And so if I pointed out something like hunger isn't caused necessarily by the way we produce food, but by the way we transport and distribute that food. So then they'll get into the logistical aspects of food production and try to understand how we can transport food more efficiently or more effectively. And both of these are fine methods. Creating food that's more nutritious, creating more food, making sure that food gets to people are really important goals in and of themselves. But it's not the whole picture. And so I'll point out that there's a political dimension to how we deal with hunger. Now, when a lot of engineers hear the word political, they tend to switch off. They look at the political aspects of a problem as something that's outside their wheelhouse. And in many ways it is. But it's folly to look at a complex problem and say that we can define all the variables and solve for that equation. What I think we all have to realize, and especially when engineers are working in practical applied sciences, is that complexity deals with dynamic variables that change over time and react to one another. And what that means is there's not necessarily a formulaic solution to that problem. And so when I teach engineers about the concept of innovation, I try to emphasize that they can't solve the whole problem. What they have to do is define a subset of the problem as narrowly as possible and as contextually relevant for the communities that are affected by the problem, and find ways in which we can collaborate with those communities to help provide a partial solution to whatever challenges they face. And that in doing so, we have a chance now to scale up those solutions to broader and broader communities. But one of the things that characterizes innovation is failure. And that makes some engineers really uncomfortable because I think a lot of them are used to defining success and failure as binary. But for innovation, success and failure can be defined across a broad range of possibilities that we could frame as being more or less successful or more or less failures. And we can apply this to our daily life. For example, if I'm having a tough week and I'm working 10, 12-hour days, I can look at my schedule, diagnose the challenges. Where in my schedule can I take time out for self-care? Which meetings can I cancel or reschedule? In what ways can I modify my schedule to allow myself a little bit of breathing room? That's how I would approach engineering my schedule. But then there are a lot of existential, complex challenges that people face on a daily basis. One of the things I've faced repeatedly in my career is trying to understand my purpose. And that goes beyond just the profession I choose and gets into the reasons why the work that I do has meaning to me and the people that I care about. So maybe the world needs more engineers, but what they need aren't engineers that can solve complicated problems, but engineers who can innovate solutions to complex problems.